Last September, I went to my first Bark River grind-in, and I really wasn't sure what to expect. Like, I saw some forum posts and some videos briefly talking about the event, but nothing that really went into detail telling you what to expect when you got there. So in this video, I want to talk about everything you need to know about the grind-in before you go, or if you're up in the air about going, hopefully this can show you what you actually do once you're there to help you make a decision. So let's start off with what the Bark River Grind-in actually is. Bark River Knives is a knife company in Escanaba, Michigan, which is up in the Upper Peninsula. So they do what I would call semi-production knives, which don't get too hung up on that. They do a lot of the grinding, the sharpening, the assembly, making the handles, all of that in-house. But stuff like the heat treating and having the actual shape of the blade cut out, they have done somewhere else and shipped in. And they don't do any kind of blacksmith work. Like, they have an actual piece of steel, and they make the knife from there. We'll go more into the actual process later in the video. Just kind of know what to expect. It's not like a blacksmith workshop or anything. So they host this event called the Grind-in twice a year in July and September, and customers can come for a long weekend and actually hands-on help make their own knives. This gives you the chance to be more hands-on and either help make your knife or actually at least see your knife being made, and it gives you some more freedom in customizing if you want to go that route. So how hands-on you'll actually be making your knife is completely up to you. Like, I have a pretty white-collar background when it comes to my actual career, so I'm not great with all the machinery. So my first knife, I was very hands-off, just kind of learning the process. But by the time I got to my third one, I was way more hands-on and actually did quite a bit of it myself. If you're kind of freaked out about that side, which I think a lot of people would be and just wouldn't admit it, they'll do everything for you if you ask them, and you can just watch them and they'll kind of talk you through it. It's still pretty cool to see, even if you don't really want to touch a lot of the machinery. Like I said earlier, it happens every July and September. If you want to go, call about half a year in advance. The one before the one I actually went to, I wanted to go to, but I called, I think it was 3 months ahead of time, and they were basically filled. Like, I couldn't actually get a position to go. So just be aware, you can't really decide to go last minute. And you don't pay till you actually get there. You're just calling to reserve your spot. So if you're going about a month ahead of time, they'll send you an email that has a form you'll fill out. What this form is picking what the first knife you'll make actually is. So you'll do this in a top 3 options because they don't have the blank knives for everything, like all their different models. So you'll just give them a preference order. So I owned a Bark River before I went, but I wasn't a crazy fanboy where I knew every model. So what I did is I went to DLT Trading and Knives Ship Free, and they'll have a bunch of models there. Look through those and find 3 that you like. You'll also pick what handle material you want to use. So for this, I'll have a link to all their handle materials they currently have. This URL might change in the future. They might change options, but it will give you a good place to start. Another way is go back to those websites I just mentioned and see what handle materials you like and just write those down. You'll also pick what pins you want and what liners you want. Liners are just a strip of color in the middle of your knife. Some handle materials require it, some don't. And then these pins are just these parts here, and they're basically just decorative. Just basically what color do you want. Besides which model of blade you're making, all this can be changed later, so don't get too worried about it, but you will need to make a decision. Just if you find something you like more later on, they'll probably let you switch it up. So now would be a good time to talk about pricing, because that does matter when you're actually picking what materials you want. So I'll have a list of the prices here, and it does change year to year. But one thing to note is that the actual model of knife you're making, like an Aurora 3 compared to a water moccasin, doesn't change the price at all. What does change the price are your handle materials, your liners, and your pins. So these upgrades can really increase the price of your knife, so just be aware of that if you are kind of on a tight budget. So the first knife you make will cost significantly more than your follow-up ones because it kind of accounts for all the employees' time and they feed you throughout the event, so it kind of adds in your food costs as well. And then your follow-up knives are going to be way cheaper. Like, they're actually a really good price for a Bark River knife. Like, I want to say it was $150. I'll have the actual price up here if that's not correct. But I think they were $150 a knife. For the base knife, not counting your upgrades. So on average, expect to spend about $250 a knife or so. But for the experience, I think that's a fair price. Well, not even fair, like a really good price, honestly. If you're a knife guy. If not, that probably sounds insane. So the event typically runs Thursday through Sunday, with Saturday kind of being the main event. So on Thursday and Friday, they are actually running production, so the kind of factory part of it's actually running. But what they'll do is after they stop production, they'll let you come in and start. I didn't realize they started Thursday when I went, so I was surprised when I showed up Friday how many people were already done with their knives. On Thursday, it's probably going to be roughly 2 p.m. when they wrap up and you can start. And then Friday will be about noon. It's a little different every year. You can always call or just show up and see if they're done or not. So when you show up, you'll sign a liability waiver, which, I mean, obviously you're working with knives and machines and stuff, so that makes sense. And then you'll get a name tag and a wristband. What took me way too long to figure out is if you have a green wristband, it means you're a customer, like you're someone just attending the event. If you have a red wristband, it means you're either an employee or someone who's volunteered to help that knows what they're doing. So if you get stuck, look for someone with a red wristband. Not that there aren't a lot of people with the green ones who have attended like 10 times and know what they're doing, but in general, you'll want to look for red. Like, one of my friends had somebody with a green wristband come up and give him advice on what to do. It was his first time. He shouldn't have been giving the advice, and one of his knives kind of got messed up. Like, it was correctable, but it was just annoying. So after that, you'll get a safety kit, which has earplugs, eye pro, and a mask. And you'll get the blank for your knife, which this isn't sharpened, it's just the outline of the actual knife itself. So I also got my handle material here, which was grilled out in the correct location. Another thing that really matters is you'll get a little card with your knife, and it will be filled out, I think, just with the model and your name at this point. As you go through the process and it has your different handle materials and pens and all that other stuff, they'll write that on this card, and basically what it does is it tells them at the end of the process how much your knife will cost. And another thing that matters here is your card will be a different color if it's your first knife compared to your follow-up knives. The reason is, by the end of Saturday, they want everyone to be done with their first knife. So if they see someone has a first knife color, they'll put that person in front of everybody else, just to make sure you at least get one done. Like I said, I did 3, and I didn't really know what I was doing when I showed up, so you don't really have to worry about it. They just want to make sure everyone gets through the process pretty fast for their first one. One thing they had hanging up at Bark River was the 19 steps to make a knife. And that's really what you'll go through at the grinding, because, I mean, that's what you're doing. This part of the video, I want to go through those 19 steps and kind of explain to you what you'll do at each one and show you on the map where it is. That way, if you're going, you kind of know where to go for different stuff before you get there. Like, I'll make one and attach it in this video, just probably as a Google Drive document, of the map of the building with where each location is, so you could actually take this up there and know where to go for each thing. I think it would have been really helpful personally, so hopefully you find it useful too. So some steps can happen in multiple spots, just a heads up. Like, there's a couple different locations for a few of these steps, but I'll just tell you the main spot you'll want to go. One disclaimer here, I know that the map already has numbers of each location, but when I went, that's not where everything was. About half of it matches up, but not all of it. So I wanted to make one that showed where it was when I went. They did say they were going to change some of their processes this year, so it might not be 100% correct, but it should be mostly right. So step 1 is choosing your blank. For your first knife, they'll just hand you one because you picked beforehand on that form I was talking about. But in the back of the building, which I didn't know this till like halfway through my time there, there's 2 tables that are just completely full of random knives, like the blanks for them. There's some that have issues, which some are salvageable, some aren't, but some are perfectly fine. If you know all the models, that's awesome. For me, for one of them, I just picked one I thought looked cool. I had no idea what it was. But there are plenty of people there that know way too much about Bark River knives, and they can help you find one too. Or if you found an employee and you said, hey, I want a fishing knife, I'm sure they would help you find one that would fit that criteria. And if you're concerned about what steel they are, most of them have engraved in the blank like 3V 154. If it's Magna Cut, it will have like an MC. So that's another thing to kind of help you pick one out here. Also, in that first room where you got your original knife, they will have some up there too. So if there's something specific you're looking for, go up there and tell them what it is. Like, I was looking for a chef's knife, didn't realize they had more knives in that front room, mentioned I wish they had one, and then they pulled one out and gave it to me. So I would check up there too if there's something you want to like specifically make. So with the knives in the back, some people did some pretty heavy modifications. I can't really speak to exactly how much they'll let you do, because I kind of went pretty standard with all mine since it was my first grind in. But you could always ask the employees, like, take the blank up there, and I'm sure they could tell you whether they think it's possible or not, depending on what you want done. Like, one of the knives I got ended up being a Strike Force 2, and it was kind of messed up. Like, I'll show mine compared to a regular one, and a little bit in front of the handle, it's missing that design. But that wasn't really anything different they had to do. So for steps 2 to 4, I can't really talk on it because I didn't really do anything like that. But here's what they are anyways. Okay, so step 5 is choosing your handle material. For the first one, they'll likely just hand you your handle material. But if not, this room here is one of my favorite spots in the entire building. It is just a room of different materials. The employees here are great, by the way. If you want a knife that's more just pretty and not going to be hard use, like maybe just around the house, they can help you pick one out. Or if you want to do something like bushcrafting or want more like a combat tactical knife, they can tell you the pros and cons of each material as well. So one thing that's really fun there is, like, for my second knife, I went with desert ironwood. And a lot of the different woods and stuff all look different. There might be 50 to 100 pieces of the same type of material, and they all have different grains and colors and kind of tones to them. So you can get really creative here and find a piece that's exactly what you're looking for. Like, you could probably spend all day there picking out materials. And in this room, if you're worried about how much it's going to cost, because the handle material probably is the easiest way to up your price really fast, they'll have a sheet here of how much everything costs. Some things aren't on there, sadly, but ask the employees and they'll tell you what to actually price it as. So some materials do look kind of weird before they get grounded and given those contours. Like G10 with like the 2 color doesn't look at all the same when it's in a block form. So if you want to know what it looks like when it's actually finished, go online and, like, while you're there on your cell phone, and if you see Black and Gray SureTouch, just type in Bark River Black Gray SureTouch knife, and you'll see some results pop up to know what your knife would kind of look like once it's actually finished. So step 6 is to cut your materials. So once you've actually picked out your handle material, there will be a table saw outside. You hand it to the employee there, they look at what knife you're making, and they'll cut the handle to roughly the right shape. So the reason you don't want too much material here is that it would just be a lot more grinding later on. So this just kind of cuts down the time there. So your handle will still just be a square block, basically. One thing to note here, if you're using like a natural material, like how I used desert ironwood for one of mine, I had some blonde in mind that I really wanted to keep. So if there's part of the material you think looks better than the other, tell the employee that's the part you want to keep of the material, and they'll make sure to cut the opposite end off. Like, mine mostly got grinded away, sadly, but you can see here on the knife that little bit of coloration. I was trying to keep that in. Once they're grinding, it's hard to know what the inside of the actual like piece of wood or whatever will look like, but you still want to try to keep that if you can. So step 7 is to flatten your materials. So the part of your handle that actually goes up against your knife, you'll want that to be perfectly flat. So you'll take this big circular sander and use it to like sand down and flatten that material. This matters because, one, it will help the glue actually adhere to it, and it will make sure there's no openings between your actual handle material and the blade steel itself. And if it's not flat, the glue might not adhere as well, so it will help kind of keep your knife together later in the future, especially if you're using it for hard use. Step 8 is to glue in your liners. So not every knife will have a liner. I only used it for one of mine. So as far as the purpose of the liner, most people use them just because they look cool. It's just like a pop of color. I'll have a couple knives here on the screen so you can see what they look like. A lot of times it's just to give some contrast. So if I understand it correctly, there is a actual use of a liner for some handle materials. So the reason this is some, like especially woods, will expand and shrink based on humidity and heat. So the liner is obviously more flexible than actual steel, so it can kind of take a little bit of that changing in size to kind of give your knife a little more resilience. I don't know how much that actually matters, but Bark River requires it for some materials, so I'm guessing they've noticed a difference just in their warranty department. As far as colors and stuff, just whatever you think looks cool. If it's a more tactical blade, you can just go with black and it won't really stand out very much. But they do have some like purples, reds, blues, and I think they even have like a glow-in-the-dark liner, which if you're using it as a hunting or a fishing knife, could make it where it's easier to find at night, so that might be a good option as well. So step 9 is to square your materials. So if you added a liner, you'll sand that as well, like what you did with your actual handle itself, just to make sure it's flat, same reason. I don't remember exactly, but I think they might also want to take it back to the table saw and cut any excess liner you have on there off, just to make sure everything's squared up as well. So step 10 is preparing your blank. So I personally never had to do anything in this step because every blank I grabbed was basically ready, good to go. So they have a giant cutout machine. I want to say it's CNC. I'm not super tech savvy when it comes to the actual like machinery they use. But they can put your knife in there and correct any issues because they have the files for all the different models they've made before. This is one of those steps where you would basically just say, hey, this is wrong with my knife, and they would just work through it there. Or if one of the employees point out something that needs change, they would tell you to go to this location, and they would correct it. There's nothing you personally need to do here besides just hand it to the employee. So step 11 is to drill holes in your blade and your handle materials. So how Bark River assembles their knife, which this is pretty common, is you have your one piece of steel, so it's full tang, so the metal goes all the way through. Then on each side of that, you have your handle material. And there's a pin that's going to be going through the top handle, the knife, bottom handle. So the knife gets glued together, but those pins provide additional support. So because they're semi-production knives, and a lot of this is done by hand, and they use a lot of natural materials, like this lining up of these holes where the pins go through, that has to be done by hand. So a lot of your blanks will already have these holes actually drilled out, which drilling through the steel is a lot harder than the handle material, so that's good. It kind of saves you time. So what they'll do is they'll take one of your handles, clamp it onto the actual piece of steel. I don't remember if they rubber band it or they just clamp it, but they keep those together so they don't move. And now your actual steel blank is the guide that they'll use to drill out the handle material. Like I said earlier, if you're using a handle material that you actually want to keep one specific part of it, like it has some coloration you really like, you'll want to point that out to the employees so they can help you kind of figure out like which orientation you want the holes drilled through. That way you can try to keep that part on your knife. So I think there are 2 different size pins they can use here. So if you have the smaller size and you want the larger one, they can increase that here. But if your blank is drilled out for the bigger hole, it's not like they can add material back to that. So they'll have to drill out your handle material for that size. The main thing is you want both sides of the handle and the knife to have the same size. Another thing to think about here is some knives are made for a lanyard hole in the back, where basically what you would do is you'd put a hollow pin there, so you can run 550 cord or whatever through the back of it to have a lanyard. So what you can do here is they can drill that out in the handle material, put that pin through there. You can either have the hollow one if you want a lanyard or just a decorative pin. But if you don't want one there, they can just not drill that, and even though there's a hole in the actual steel, that will be covered up by the handle itself. So like, I personally didn't care about that, so I had them cover it up on one of my knives. So this entire step is done on a big drill press. There was one point where the production was way slowed down. I was the only person in line, and the Bark River employees actually let me use it, but they were damn near holding my hand the whole time. During most of the process, this is one of the bottlenecks, so what they'll do is you just hand it to them, tell them what you want, and they do it. I didn't see hardly anyone else actually touch the drill press at any point. So step 12 is choosing your pins. So there's two standard choices that don't cost you any more money, and one is a brass look and the other is silver. But you can pay to upgrade to a mosaic pin, which means it just has design in it. So the mosaic pins are deceptively expensive upgrades because you pay the upgrade cost per pin, so it does add up pretty fast, but there are some knives that look amazing with it. So as far as color and design and stuff, that has no functional difference on your knife whatsoever. The only exception to this is some of the pins are hollow. So that means you could run something like a lanyard through it. So that's the only time it would actually matter for functionality. So if you see a slot that seems like it's way too far back on the knife for actual structural support, that's probably what it's there for. You don't have to use it for that, but that was probably its original purpose. So one thing I didn't think about until I started seeing other people's knives is you can miss and match. Like, you can have some silver and some brass pins. You could have one where it's like, if there's 3 pins, you could have solid, and mosaic in the middle. You can really miss and match however you want. Just, like I said, it's literally what you think looks cool. If you aren't sure what all the choices are, they literally just have bins full of the different, like, mosaics and stuff. There's not a ton of choices. I want to say there were, like, 4 or 5 options when I was there. But you can look through and find whichever one you like. A lot of them will just be in one big piece. I didn't realize mosaic pins, or any pins for that matter, just come in like one big steel tube, and they just slice them off as they need it. So step 13 is to shape the front of your handle. So it's really important you do this step now, because once the blade is attached, it becomes a lot more difficult. So the reason you want to do this now is, in theory, what you can do is take your 2 pieces of handle material and shape both of them at the same time without the blade. Like, if you attach the handle materials to the blade, like, let's say on this one, that these were big blots of wood and they weren't shaped yet. Like, the knife also wouldn't be sharpened. What I'd have to do is, along the grinder, basically take the grinder and hit right here and right here separately. So it'd be hard to get those even with each other, and I'm having to actually shape this part of the handle with the knife blade on it. So here's the grind belt, I'd have to run it like right here. If there's no blade in between the handle material, it's way easier to hold these together, get them symmetric, so they're the same, and I don't have to worry about the blade running up against the grinding belt. It's not that it can't be done, it's just way easier to do it this way, and it completely makes sense why Bark River does it that way. So what you'll actually do here is you'll actually take your 2 pieces of your handle and you'll put your pins through them to hold them together. So you're not gluing it, your pins are literally there just to hold it. You can rubber band it or clamp it or whatever you want. And then, having your 2 pieces of your handle basically like one piece, you'll just shape the front of it along where the blade is, like I showed you before. So this will happen in the same room where you'll assemble everything later on. There is one giant room of grinders, but it won't be in there. There'll be just 1 or 2 grinders in the assembly room. So this is one part that I think is kind of nice to do on your own, because you're just holding like a piece of G10 or wood or something. There's nothing dangerous. Worst case scenario is the grinder hits your hand and scrapes it. So it is nice to actually kind of put a finishing touch on your knife. So I only own like a little cheap 1-inch belt grinder. So the employee showed me what to do on my first one, then helped me do my other ones. Where I got to do it, they just gave me some guidance. So this is a step that I actually messed up on my knife. This knife here has this, hopefully I can get the camera to focus, has this lanyard loop in the back. What I didn't think about was these points right here on the handle, they were sticking out basically to the edge of this, and they're really hard to hit without actually hitting this loop. So if your knife has something like this sticking out the back, you want to also shape it to line up with the back of your knife. So I had a couple of the people up there be like, yeah, that's just going to be messed up. One of the employees, I want to say people were calling him Skittles, if I remember his name correctly. I'm assuming that's not his real name. Took it and corrected that, where he was running it just along the edge of a grind belt. Really helped me out and saved it. Loved how they corrected it. So if you mess up, the employees there really will help you out. Like, they understand it's their full-time job, and you're probably coming from your accounting job or something to work up there for a weekend. So they're pretty understanding if you do something dumb like that. So step 14 is preparing your handles. So the most important thing here is dry fit everything together before you glue it. Because there will be times like the pins are slightly oversized and they don't fit. Or you line it up and you realize, oh, I accidentally have the liner on the outside of the handle. So just dry fit it. I know that sounds like mistakes you wouldn't make, but something about this area, people's brains just turn off and they do stupid stuff. And it's really hard to undo it once you glue it. So take the extra 30 seconds and dry fit it. And if you don't know what that means, it just means assemble everything without glue and make sure it looks right before you actually apply glue. This is also a step where you'll clean off your knife. So you'll just want to make sure there's like no dust in between the blade and the liner, any debris in there. So you're just prepping it all to actually glue it. Like, I wish I would have wrote down or taken pictures of the actual like substance they were using to clean it. I don't think it was just rubbing alcohol, but you will kind of wipe everything down and get it ready. There's employees that just kind of stay in this assembly room, so they'll help you out. So step 15 is gluing your knife. So after dry fitting, you'll basically want to take all your pieces in the order they want to be in. So you'll apply glue in between your handle and the actual blade on each side, and you'll have a dab of glue on your pen, and you'll just put it all together. Soon as you do this, you'll apply clamps. I want to say it's in front of the first pen, in between your pens in the middle, and then one clamp on the rear of your knife. That way there's kind of even pressure throughout the whole thing. And there is a time limit, they say. I want to say it was 15 minutes, but don't hold me to that. There's not really a minimum, though. So just leave your knife clamped together so the glue can dry. Step 16 comes basically immediately after everything's clamped together, ready to go. And that's to clean your knife. The glue will like ooze out where the pens are or along the actual spine of your knife. So if this was glued together, there might be glue right there. It doesn't necessarily hurt anything. It will just be like dry glue that you can't get off if you don't clean it. So they basically have tubs of, I want to say it's rubbing alcohol, and basically like toothbrushes. And you'll just scrub everything down really good to get that excess off there. Because if you had glue get up on your blade, you don't want that just dried on there. It takes like 30 seconds, but it's one of those things that just makes it look more professional once you're actually done. So steps 17 and 18 take place in the same room, and it's just a giant room of grinders, basically. Just big 2 or 3 inch belt grinders. So step 17 is where they shape your handles and polish them. So it takes it from a big like block of wood to actually looking like a knife handle and being polished. So this room is simultaneously the biggest bottleneck of the entire process from what I saw, where sometimes it can take you like an hour or two or more to actually have your knife ready to go there and then actually get to it. And it's the most dangerous part because you're holding your knife up against a big spinning belt. So I never saw anyone that wasn't one of the red wristband, like either employees or helpers, actually do this part. They just walk you through it like you walk with your knife and give them feedback as you go. Each step in the way, it gets finer and finer sandpaper down to where it's basically just polishing. In each step, they hand you your knife and ask you what you think. So kind of the two main decisions you have here is how thick or thin do you want your handle. So my final knife was a chef's knife for my wife, and she's very small build, so I wanted the handle to be very thin for her, and they were able to do that here. But if you're making a bushcraft knife and you have big man hands and want it to have a thicker handle, they can do that as well. The other decision you'll have is how polished you want it to be. Like, the finer they go along the process, it will become more and more glossy, while if you stop earlier, it will be more of a matte finish. It kind of depends on the material, how much they'll actually be able to do with this. There's some materials that you can go very, very matte or very glossy. Some you don't really have all that many options with it. So you'll just have to kind of ask them what they can do here, if you even have a preference. So after your handle is done, the last thing they do, which is step 18, is to grind your knife. So that's actually sharpening the blade. From where the handles are, you literally just walk around to the other side of the room, and they have it where they have the actual, like, edge sharpeners, which again are all done on belt grinders. I'm not exactly sure how much they'll actually let you change, like, what your grind is and stuff. I think how far up on the actual blade itself the grind goes, you can tell them. I know on the chef's knives, I left mine actually fairly thick, but they can do more of a full grind and thin that down a little bit, but it just kind of depends on the knife. So it takes them a minute, but they get it sharp enough where they hold up a piece of paper and just kind of slice it to show you that it's sharpened up. Which makes sense because you get to assemble everything and shape the handle and stuff with a non-sharpened knife. So the last step is step 19, which is etching and cleaning your knife. So you don't do this at all. You just take your knife to this room and hand it to them, and they'll do everything from there. I have a picture of what my knife looked like after it was sharpened, but before it was cleaned, so you can kind of see the comparison. This part didn't come with it, but they'll get a sheath for it, and they'll etch it. At least the year I was there, it said Bark River Knives 2023 Grinding. So they'll put that on there as well. I know some people were talking about ways to actually remove that if you didn't like the fact that it said grinding. I thought it was cool because I thought the event was awesome to go to, so I kind of wanted it to actually mark where it came from. And I don't plan on reselling any of these personally, so maybe for resale value, people don't like the grinding knives, but on Facebook, I've never noticed that actually affecting anything. So they'll have the knives for a couple hours, then you can come pick them up later. If it's your first knife, they'll hang on to it until later that night, because at dinner there's a big banquet where they have all the knives displayed, at least the first ones everybody does. Another thing they do is they do take photos at this point, so all your knives will have like a professional photo taken of them, and they'll be uploaded to the Bark River Facebook page later on. That way everybody can see what people made, and you can get the photos of your knife downloaded from there. So an unofficial step 20, and probably the most important one to Bark River, is you pay for your knife. That little paper you had at the beginning, where they filled out what all your knife actually had as far as like materials and whatnot, you can now go pay for it. I think you might actually do this before you give it to them for like etching and cleaning, but I don't think they ever actually checked. I think you're supposed to pay for it before then, but I didn't see where it really mattered, honestly. So you go up to where you got your initial waiver and everything, and you can pay for it there. So if I remember right, they'll take cash or card. So however you have to pay them, I think should be fine. Alright, so you're now done with your first knife. You can start your other one if you want to. There's not a limit to how many you can make, besides if your bank account runs out, but most people seem to make 3, I think was pretty average. So for your second one, if you don't have something really specific in mind that they have up front, I would recommend going up to that front rim and asking them what all they have, and kind of thinking through what your option is there, and then going to that big table in the back where they have all just the random stuff, and like looking through that too. So once you've actually picked your blank, go back up to that front table. They'll give you another card that you fill out, and then you can start the process all over again. Outside of actually making your knife, there's a couple things that happen at this event as well. One thing is they cater in food, so you'll actually have some lunches and some dinners. So I'm somewhat of a foodie. Like, I travel for work about every other week or two, and the guys I work with do a lot of, like, Yelping for food. And I watch a lot of, like, the Food Network stuff with my wife, so I always try to go to, like, restaurants I see on there. And I will say, I was really surprised at how good the food was. Like, I can be kind of picky, and it was legitimately good. I don't know why there's so many good caterers just randomly in the Upper Peninsula, but I liked every single meal we had. Sometimes at events like this, it's not worth eating what they cater in, or you're just eating it just to eat something. But everyone I heard actually really enjoyed what they had. And I think it's the same people basically every time, which is a good thing. So another thing with these meals is it's time to, like, socialize with people. I'm pretty introverted, but everybody was really nice. If you can talk about guns and knives and EDC and just that kind of stuff, you can sit there and talk for hours with these guys. So there's a couple vendors as well. Be Kind Studios was up there, and they make little handkerchiefs and pouches and stuff. So I bought some stuff from them. There's a couple people that have their own handmade knives, and then some people selling Bark Rivers that they have from their personal collections. There was a little bit of like a in-person Facebook buy-sell trade thing going on. So if there's anything you were looking for, you might actually be able to find it there. Or if there's a Bark River knife you've wanted to see in person, there's a very good chance that someone there will have it. Like, some people had some pretty rare stuff, like some of the larger Bark Rivers that they don't really make anymore. So that was really cool to see as well. One thing they do on Saturday night is they have a big table with everybody's first knife, and you get to vote on which one is your favorite. I want to say you vote for like your top 3. And then whoever wins ends up getting an award. They have some like small speeches they give, and then there's a couple of like funny awards too. Like, my buddy won First Blood because he was the first person to injure himself. Like, he's fine, he just like scraped his hand on a grinder. So especially since I knew him, I thought that was hilarious that he got an award for being the first one to hurt himself. So that should cover everything you need to know about what to expect if you go to the grind-in. If you have any other questions, like I said, I only have gone once, but feel free to ask in the comments. If I don't know, I'll try to ask somebody who does. Or if you were kind of up in the air about it, hopefully this kind of gives you an idea of if it's something you'd enjoy or not. Alright, thank you for watching.